Welcome to the Growing Through It podcast. We're here with Celia Dodd, journalist and author of books on major life transitions, including The Empty Nest, Your Changing Family, Your New Direction, where she set out to discover whether other parents felt as sad and confused as she did when her children left home. Her latest book is All Grown Up, Nurturing Relationships with Adult Children. Celia, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on, Jen. It's great to be here.
Good. Well, now that listeners know about you from a professional standpoint, let's hear let's hear a personal fun fact.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question actually for me, because fun really went out of my life when the kids left home. And so rediscovering that fun and what I really enjoyed was kind of a bit of a mission. And I really set out to kind of find it. And I tried all kinds of different ways. I went on craft weekends. I started playing my flute again after 30 years, did all these things. But the thing that really did it for me was Scottish dancing, which is like folk dancing. It's like folk dancing.
Well, I'm thinking Irish step dancing. What is it? Folk dancing? Is it?
It's more like in partners, and reels and all that kind of thing. I don't know what the equivalent would be in America, but you definitely you're not in a line. You're dancing with a partner, but within a group of people.
Okay.
And it's kind of Irish or Scottish or whatever, but it's incredibly energetic and you really lose yourself in the flow. The great thing about it is I've always loved dancing, but at my age, not feel a bit embarrassed to be dancing to the Rolling Stones still. So I wanted something a little bit more formal, a little bit more. But as I say, all ages do it. The club I go to, you get people from from 6 to 80 dancing. So it's incredibly inclusive, incredibly friendly, and you just lose yourself in the moment and you get really fit. But that's not why I do it. I do it because it is absolute fun for 3 hours.
3 hours?
Yes, like 3 hours. Break in the middle. You go and have you go and get a little something, a little something. And you don't have to do every single dance. It's not like it's not a marathon. You don't have to. It's fun.
Got it. And you do it weekly?
I do it as often as I can. It can be quite difficult to find people to go with because it's a niche taste, but I go as often as I can.
Yeah. Well, I love these personal fun facts. You just never know what you're going to learn. So thank you for that. Well, obviously you wrote a book, Your Children Leaving Home Affected You Deeply. We're just talking about that, but yeah. And I know it's a little while back, but it's still a vivid memory. So can you take us through what it was like for you when your children left home?
Yeah, it was really physical, actually. I felt, a lot of people say they feel like they've lost a part of themselves. You genuinely feel empty. It's not called the empty nest for nothing. I think I really missed my son, who was the first to go. I missed each of them as much as each other, but obviously when he was the first, I felt kind of adrift. I didn't know who I was anymore, although I had work and all kinds of other things in my life. And I felt very uncertain about my relationship with him, how that would go in the future. I was very worried about that because obviously a teenage boy is, it's not the easiest time in a relationship with parents. And so you think, is it going to be like, how will it be? I think uncertainty. And of course I was worried about my relationship with my husband, how would that cope? How would we cope? So I think I just felt all kinds of things, but I just felt the light had gone out of my life. I think that's what I felt. I felt just like, and that life was downhill all the way from now on, which has turned out to be not the case. I feel much more positive now, but at the time it was tough. It was tough.
Did your other children notice? Because you had 2 others at home. Did they notice like, hey, Mom, what's going on?
Yeah, they did. And I think I tried to talk to them about it and just say, because I think they missed them too, they missed him. But I hope they realized that I would feel the same about each of them, but I think, to be honest, my next son was an adolescent, he was going through his own stuff. He wasn't that bothered about what was happening with me that much, but I feel bad if I made them think that I only cared about Paul and I wasn't going to be upset about them.
Well, I imagine it's tricky, right? You're so upset because we used to joke with my mom that, oh, you've got your favorites. We always said my little brother, we still give him hell to this day because
Yeah,
she was your favorite.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So how did you get to the process? So you were very like didn't understand the feelings, the uncertainty kind of rocked you, and then you said, "I'm going to go interview other people." Like, what was that
Yeah,
process like?
yeah. Well, I think the first thing that happened was I was just sitting with a friend and just having a cup of tea, and we just started talking about it. And you know, before we knew where we were, you know, hours had gone by. They were lighting the candles on the table, and you know, we had just been absorbed in this conversation, and I realized how deeply she had felt it. You know, she found herself howling on the kitchen floor, you know, and really, really bereft. And so I thought, aha, I must talk to other people. It isn't just me. It isn't just a thing, you know, at the time, I think there was a feeling that it was just women who didn't work who felt the emptiness because they, you know, they didn't have anything else to do, kind of thing. So I set out to interview, you know, other parents, loads of other parents, fathers as well as mothers. I thought that was really important. And then crucially, I talked to lots of psychologists and psychotherapists and family therapists who of course can give some kind of real context and can really, you know, show you the research and say, yeah, actually this is a real thing, you know, this isn't but at the same time, don't pathologize it. You know, this is natural. It's not a kind of, you know, it's just a major transition. And I just wanted, you know, I realized that this was indeed how other parents felt, and I wasn't the only one.
Yeah, it was interesting about transitions because we talk about that. Like, I work a lot in the workplace, and you're like, there's a lot of transitions. Someone's a new hiring, there's a retirement, there's a lot of, especially when you think about even early in life, there's a lot of transitions, and then you know, steady for what, 18 years, maybe
sure.
15, 10 years. There's kind of steady, and then there's this big transition in your life that it's probably been a while since it's actually happened. And like you said, it's natural.
Yeah, it's totally natural. But you're so used to having your children at the center of your life, you know, even if you work full time, you know, you're always thinking, you know, you'll be in the middle of a meeting and you'll be thinking, oh, has she got her gym kit? You know, has she got, you know, did she do her homework? You know, you're thinking about them. They're kind of they're always there. And you that daily care, that daily physical contact with them. Yeah, you're very, very used to it, even though they've changed dramatically from babies to kind of 18-year-olds. You are very used to this lovely family life, which is very cozy and lovely. And the end of that is a real sadness, I think. You know, one dad said to me, you know, I'll never be with my daughter in quite the same way again. And I think that's what it is. I mean, obviously, I now feel the relationship improves and strengthens, and it's not the end. But at the time, I think you can feel very, you know, oh, well, how is it going to be?
Right. Yeah. With every new stage, there's something I love and hate about it, but then there's just that next stage, and it continues.
Exactly.
Like we'll talk about.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
I love that you included fathers, right? Because we tend to fixate on the
really
mothers, but it's
important.
just the same. I mentioned it to my husband. I said, yeah, thinking about this is like the kids are going to be gone. He's like, yeah, it's kind of going to be weird. I think he'll appreciate the quiet in some sense, but he's like, yeah, kind of realized it too. Now, when you interviewed people, did you notice any themes come out of the interviews?
Yes. Well, the thing I mentioned before about feeling, you know, that you've lost a part of yourself, I think for women, that was very common. You know, just feeling kind of lost. And also just this ambivalence, you know, that you feel all kinds of different emotions. It's quite confusing. You want, as a mother, as a parent, particularly actually as a dad, you're excited for your child, you're proud, that's, you know, you want them to do well, but at the same time you're worried about them. And you know, one father actually said to me, you know, you just, of course you feel ambivalent, you feel all these mixed emotions, that's natural, and part of dealing with it is to sort of allow yourself to feel two things at once, more than one thing at once. That's sort of part of being resilient, I suppose. And I think one thing I found that the parents who were dealt with it most successfully were kind of ready. You know, they felt their child was ready. They were ready. They'd maybe been a parent for a very long time. They had, you know, maybe stepchildren, or they maybe had a lot of children, and they just felt ready. That the time was right, that their child was ready, and so that was quite interesting. And by contrast, the parents that that found it hardest kind of weren't ready, and also perhaps were slightly insecure about their relationship with their child for all kinds of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps because of their own background, or something, they just didn't feel very secure in relationships generally, and were worried about it continuing. But I think also the fathers was very interesting. That I think a lot of women think that fathers, their partners, perhaps don't feel it as much, but so many men I spoke to felt it deeply in a different way. They didn't give birth. It isn't biological. It is biological. It's not. It isn't quite the same. But I was very pleasantly surprised at how thoughtful the men were about not only about their relationships, but about the whole thing, and about how they could get through it.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to go back to when you said that the people who transitioned and maybe adapted a little better, they felt like their kids were ready and they were ready. Yes. And you mentioned that they had maybe just kids or multiple kids. Did they do anything to prepare? Now, I do want to get into some of the ideas you had in your book on preparing, but did they purposely prepare, or was it just a natural, just kind of all feels like it's just right?
I think they felt, I think part of it is feeling like not your job's done, but you have, I think a big part of it is feeling that they felt they'd equipped their child to go. And I think that's quite important, that they felt, okay, you can't prepare your child for every eventuality. Bad stuff is going to happen, which is a horrible idea. But they felt they'd kind of equipped their children with a toolbox, a kind of emotional toolbox to deal with whatever life threw at them. I think that was quite important. And also, I think they had thought about their own lives and how they could foresee that there were good things about not having to be in two places at once, being able to say yes to invitations, being able to be more single-minded, particularly for women, about their careers. One woman in particular, who was really, really loving her empty nest. She was able to throw herself into organizing a film festival. She had a whole wonderful new career. And so she was looking forward to that as she waved goodbye to her daughter. So, yeah, I think there is that sort of, there is that preparing as much to do with your child as with yourself.
Yeah, you always see those movies where the kids are out and the parents convert their room into a gym or something.
Oh, yes. Well, I think that's a really terrible idea. I think that's a terrible idea.
Oh, tell me more.
No. I think that's really bad, because I think the connection with your children carries on, and they're going to carry on coming home. And I mean, my kids would have been devastated if I'd touched anything in their room, never mind turned it into a gym. So they want to come back. They want to feel there's a safe, home is a safe haven, even if it's a concept. They want to feel that that they can come back. And I think one of the mistakes about the empty nest, a mistake I made myself, was that it was the end of something. It isn't. It's the beginning of something else. It is this transition between the two phases. So no, I think it's really bad to turn their room into a gym.
Don't sell the house and go out. Go to another country. Well, one of the things you mentioned in your book was having an identity crisis, because it's interesting. You're still a parent. You're not. That's not changing, but it's just the relationship. So talk to you, what did you find with people going, okay, now what is my purpose? Because you said it happens not only with women, fathers, people who are working and have an active, kind of career, stay-at-home moms, those type things. So, but what did you find related to the identity crisis?
Well, I think it's partly it's the absence of the daily nurturing that you do, the cooking and laundry, and also the listening. So you're not doing that on a daily basis. So there's that aspect of it. But I think it also goes much deeper, that your kind of core identity from the minute you give birth is as a mum and as a dad when your wife gives birth. And it's a bit like the flip side of when you do have a child. You know, your whole identity is actually turned on its head, and life is kind of completely thrown. And that's an amazing transition that people go through. This is like the flip side of that almost. And I think one psychologist said to me, you know, without your children around you, you know, you reflect each other's moods. So, you know, your mood and your kind of general how you feel about life is quite dependent on your child and how they get coping. You know, are they okay? And when there isn't, of course, you still know how they're getting on, even though they've left home. But there isn't that daily contact. There isn't that physical thing. And I think you just begin quite naturally. I remember when my daughter was my youngest, she was probably about 12 and she'd gone to a sleepover or something. So there was nobody in the house. And I just literally thought, what is the point of me? And it was really hard, actually. And it was a kind of a bit of a wake up call, probably. But yeah, I think, you know, you really kind of need to take stock of that. You need to kind of think about your core identity, because of course, as you say, you're still a mum, but you've got a different kind of role, and you're not that kind of you're not a hands-on mum anymore. You've got to learn to care at a distance and still be that very supportive figure, but have a different relationship, you know, to yourself and to the world. You know, I think that's a really important part of the transition.
Yeah, the quiet, I think, is gonna, you know, it's like it's interesting because as a parent of two young kids, it's like I crave the quiet. I love it.
Yes.
But I think it's a completely different thing when you know that's quiet all the time. Like,
Yeah, it
it's
is.
yeah, that's
No,
gonna be
it's
more tough.
completely different. And of course you do, you know, just you saying that, I think, why didn't I enjoy it more? You know, you're full of regret that, why didn't I enjoy all that noise? You know, it was such fun. Because it isn't all fun.
No,
And you get buried, you know, your identity to some extent can get a bit buried under being a parent. And you need to kind of rediscover yourself, like I was saying at the beginning, to discover the things that you really enjoy, that really have importance to you, because you spend so much of your time doing what the kids enjoy, or just molding your whole life around the children, I think.
so true.
And that's fabulous. And, you know, I loved being a mom. I really loved it. I love it still. But there are other things in life, you know, there are other things in life that are really important too. And it's great to have an opportunity to discover them, I think.
Yeah, if you can look at it that way, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things that a friend of mine has said recently, empty nester, she said, I don't know how I'm going to handle being around my husband all the time, because the one thing is, you know, kids are good buffers.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
you can be so, I mean, it's annoying sometimes, because you're like, when my husband and I are just trying to have a conversation, you're like,
Yeah.
quit interrupting me. But
Yeah.
what happens, and what did you find happen when you were interviewing people in the relationship with their partners when their kids left home?
Well, it's a big crunch time, I think, for couples, this. I mean, you know, divorce is you know, increased quite a lot in this age group. And I think the empty nest is part of it. It's not the only reason, but I think it's a time when you really have to look at your relationship and think, right, you know, well, what's going to happen now? But because people really worry that they won't have anything to talk about. You know, children are this wonderful joint enterprise. And when they go, as you say, it's irritating. You know, they stop you doing all kinds of things together, but at the same time, they cement you in a way. So I think when they go, people really have to think about, oh, well, how's it going to be now? What are we going to do? What are we going to change? How are we going to get back to the thing that got us together in the first place? I mean, you can never go right back, but you can, you know, you can think of yourself as partners and lovers, even not just parents, not just mum and dad. You know, you get so used to being in that role. And one of the lovely dads in my book, you know, he had really thought about this, and he said, you know, we were a foursome, and now we're a twosome, and I've really got to think about, you know, how we are going to, you know, make our relationship lovely again, you know. So I think it takes work, but it's fun doing the work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was some Californian research that showed that marriages really often improve when the kids leave home, but just getting over that transition, it's putting in a bit of work.
Right. And I wonder too, like how much of it is they've been waiting to get divorced till the kid it's been in the works. My husband's parents, as soon as he graduated, youngest one, divorce, right? It was fine. I mean, but they had been waiting till the kids leave to have it happen. So I wonder how much of it's just kind of in the works versus because the kids left,
Yeah, sure. No, I think that's very common. And I think that's hard as well I think it's hard for everybody. But yeah, I think also a lot of people just aren't prepared for the difference that children leaving, they might think about it a little bit, but they're not quite ready for the impact it's going to have. And, you look at the other person, you suddenly think, oh my goodness, there's that middle-aged man, and you think, oh, and I'm this middle-aged woman, oh dear, so you've really, I think that is hard. And some people do, as like your husband's parents, they call it a day, and that's fine too. Sad, it's very sad when you've got a joint history of being parents, I think.
Mm-hmm. Did you find this is one thing that sometimes my husband and I just aren't on the same page emotionally about things? I take things a little harder than he does. Did you find that with any couples that maybe, one was like just lost and the other was like, well, I'm okay. Like, how did how'd that work out?
Well, I think that's a kind of natural balance. Having, I've talked to so many couples about this, and of course with my own husband, who I felt at the time was very like gung-ho, kind of, oh, off they go, oh, it'll be great, it'll be fabulous. And then he went to his doctor, because he was feeling a bit, wasn't sure what was wrong with him. And the doctor said, oh, I think you've got empty nest syndrome. And I hadn't really noticed that. So I think it's very common that men and women express the way they're feeling in very different ways. And it's very easy for women to think that their partners are being heartless, but in fact they've got, a psychologist talked to me about this letting go energy. The kids need somebody, mum or dad, to say, off you go, it's all going to be fine, it's going to be fab, so that there's this balance with the other partner, often the mum, who's going, oh, take care, don't do this, don't drink too much, call me when you get there. So you've got this wonderful balance, but I think that can lead to misunderstandings. And as you say, some men just aren't as good at talking about it, and perhaps don't feel they have permission to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I think as in a partnership, women need to give them the space to talk about it. We both need space to hear how we're feeling, how the other person's feeling.
Yeah, and everyone expresses it differently, and so your husband was feeling it. It just didn't come out the same.
But it's just as deep, It's not. Yeah, it's just different. Yeah.
Right. One of the statements in your book I'm going to read, because I think it's lovely. Each transition ought to be an opportunity for parents to ask, what does this give me space for now, and what am I going to do with this? And when do you actually recommend that parents start asking themselves this question? I'm assuming it's not as soon as their kids leave, they're like, okay, now's the day. Like, does it need to happen before and start getting a little bit uncovering what is of interest to you?
Ideally, yes. I mean, I think all the research into transitions that I did, particularly for my book on retirement, that seemed to show that if you can start new things long before the actual change, that provides continuity through the sort of massive change you're going through. So if you can start things like a new activity that's sociable and takes you out of the house, and that you really love and that's regular, if you can start that in a couple of years before the kids leave, then that will sort of act as a kind of lovely bridge between the kind of old life and the new life, if you like. I think that's in an ideal world. But I think a lot of parents are in denial. I certainly was, about the empty nest. And so when my son left, I was too bereft really to think about doing anything. So I think it really is helpful. And I think to think beforehand, a couple of years, a lot of people would say, at each transition, there are points in your child's life when you really notice them becoming more independent. When they first ride a bicycle, when they first go to the shops on their own, when they first have a sleepover, when they go away for a weekend. You notice these things, and I think that's a very good opportunity to think about your own life. It's a kind of wake-up call to think about, oh, well, what can I be doing differently, and think of, so that allows you to think about the future in a positive way, not in a, oh, I'm going to miss them so much way, but to think proactively about, okay, this is going to change, and this can be in positive ways as well as in sad ways.
Yeah. I think it's just that shift in your head too. It's like our brains focus so much on the threat that if you're going, well, this also gives us some opportunity, gives me opportunity. Because there's probably stuff as parents that we've wanted, like I've wanted to do, but I can't go out and join a hiking group for 8 hours on a weekend. Like I can't do it right now.
Exactly. So, I know.
Noting those maybe as we go along can be helpful to be like, okay,
I think that's really important, noting them, because the trouble is that you forget all these things that when it comes to it, and when you're feeling sad and blue, you tend to forget all those things that you wanted to do. So I think write them down, have a fabulous list waiting, and then you can just jump on it.
I'm going to get started on that list. So how was it, Celia, for you when you had 3 kids leave? You've talked about your son and you were very lost. And then was it different with each child leaving?
It was different, but it was just as hard because I missed each one just as much. They're so different, and you miss something about each one. I think the bonus of having one, obviously you get used to it, and so with the second I knew that I would cope. With the first I didn't know how it would be, but with the second I probably developed a few strategies to cope, and with the third, I mean, I was bereft when my daughter Alice left.
She was your third?
But she was the youngest, yeah. And so but I think I just knew that I would cope. And I think obviously the dynamics in the family had changed as well. So I'd had more time. I mean, the real blessing in a way was that with a middle child, you never have time on their own with them because they're born into a family with an older sibling. So that was a real joy to have time with him on my own, some time with him on my own. And when he came out, because actually he came back later when the youngest had gone. So we really did have some quality time. And, if it's great for younger siblings not to have the older siblings kind of dictating what's cool, what's not cool. They can be themselves, they can blossom in some ways. So I think there's all sorts of good things that can happen, but I think also the young ones do miss, you have to be aware that it's not just you that's missing your child, their siblings are as well. It has an impact on the whole family and how you all get on and how you all relate to each other.
I've just noticed that with my older son, who dominates most of everything. He's the chatty one. He's the, that's not like, and so my daughter, like, obviously is like, follows everything he does. But I'm so curious if that wasn't around, would she we need to make sure she has space to talk and develop without the dominating personality. So part of it will be really interesting to see, especially because she'll be in high school when, assuming he leaves. So I think that's an interesting point, right? You'll have time with each of them. Well, depending how many kids you have separately.
Exactly. And I think that is a real blessing, actually. I think it's a real, it's something you don't necessarily expect, but it is really nice.
Yeah, one of the things that you had in your book, this did not even occur to me, maybe because I'm not thinking of the logistics of my kids leaving, but social media. So you can follow them on social media and just watch them all be a train wreck or be whatever they're going to be on social. So I'm assuming there's upsides, downsides. Can you walk us through how do parents navigate that as their kids leave?
Well, I think I do know of parents who really do follow their children on social media, and they expect a text. This isn't so much social media, but they expect the children to let them know where they are, to say, oh, I've got home safely and so on, every night. Well, you're just creating a burden for yourself, I think. And I really think from the child's point of view, the child wants to know that you believe that they can cope on their own. And in a way, if you follow them on social media all the time and you're kind of checking up on them, that's giving a message that you don't really trust them to cope without you. And I think that's really unhelpful to the child, apart from the fact it could be irritating to them. Depends on the child. Some kids obviously are very happy with it. I know my kids would have hated it if I'd been following them a lot. But it's, and it must be so reassuring, because you can see your child, and so it's so tempting to follow them. But I think you have to really resist it, or really try and keep it to a minimum, that you feel comfortable with, because it not only curbs your child's independence, but it curbs your own, because it's holding you back from, if you're following your child all the time, you're not shifting your focus onto you, which is where it really should be. You should be focusing on your new future, because there's a great saying from I heard a Buddhist monk say that the greatest gift you can give your child is to be happy yourself. And so in a way, your independence is their independence is dependent on your independence. They're kind of interlinked. I think that's really worth remembering and worth.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm trying to think of which way to go with this, because I think one thing I do want to offer listeners, for you to offer listeners, is the preparing your children, because there are great tips in the book, which I encourage people to check out, because things like, they need to know how to cook 2 meals, right? Like cook basic meals, like know some basic stuff. But then you also talked about the emotional toolbox. So if parents are listening that maybe have kids that'll be leaving in the next, let's say 5 to 8 years, what are maybe like 2 things that you say, like parents, like, here are 2 things to prepare your children to be able to handle on their own?
I think one thing is to it's almost model that it's okay not to feel okay, that it's okay to have a bad day. I think kids can, it can be quite hard, especially when you first leave home. You're going to feel not great some of the time. You're going to be lonely. Hopefully not for too long, but there will be feelings when you don't feel that comfortable. And I think if parents can sort of almost model that, it's okay to say, oh, a really bad day, but then your child can see you're okay. You're not saying, oh, it's all lovely, it's all fabulous. So they can then see there are ways to cope with that. There are ways to handle that. It's almost not like you're almost showing them by your example, I suppose. The other thing that I think is really helpful is to encourage your child to develop activities that they really enjoy doing on their own, as well as in a group. So the wonderful example would be learning an instrument. Maybe that's a bit antisocial when you're living in a college hall or whatever, but if you play a guitar, so you practice on your own and then you go out. Because I think a lot of kids can panic if, when the door shuts, there's no mum and dad, there's no friends, they've got to be happy in their own company. So I think that's a really important one. I think not spend all their time on their own, but to have something that really absorbs them, that they really enjoy, that allows them to enjoy being themselves. Yeah,
I love that advice, because if they aren't comfortable in their own skin, on their own, with their own company, then they're probably just going to fill it with people that they don't need to, and just anyone, right? So I think that's a wonderful skill I haven't even thought about. Hopefully, if musical kids, or if not, they could figure.
Well, there's all kinds of stuff, isn't there? That's about, I'm sure there are other things.
So
Knitting.
Yes,
You
people
know,
do
whatever. I
things.
don't know.
Right. We're thinking painting. There's tons of things, solo
Yeah,
activities
let's.
they can do. But being comfortable in their own company.
Yeah,
Got it.
yeah.
Now, I want to also talk about developing relationships with adults. So you have adult children. That's just a new
Mhm.
relationship. And I've heard it from, friends who have said all the hard work that I put in when they were kids is finally paying off. They're loving that adult relationship with their
Yeah,
children.
yeah,
Whereas some people they still have old fights and old resentments
yeah.
and
Mhm.
things that really block developing that healthy relationship as adults. So, what
Mm,
do you recommend for parents? Probably, I'm assuming, like as they are leaving or throughout life,
mm,
you tell us
mm.
what to start building that, start kind of planting the seeds because they're not quite adults yet.
No, they're
But I
not.
imagine you need to start kind of
Mm.
cultivating a different type of relationship.
Yeah, I think you really do. I mean, that's why I wrote my book, All Grown Up, about it, because the next stage is just as important, really, as when they're leaving. I think it sounds a bit obvious, but it's hard. Is to treat them as adults, to see them in a new light as adults, and I think part of that is talking to them like adults, because it's very tempting. I still do it now. I'll wag my finger at my daughter and say, and she just, she calls me out. This is what, look at yourself, mom. So there's all that thing, or the way you might ask them to help you do something. If you really think, well, would I ask my friend in that way? I think you really have to be careful with your language, the way you talk to a child, and also to have faith in them, to believe that you've done your job. It's quite scary to feel you've done your job as a parent, and of course it carries on in some ways, but to let them make mistakes, stand back, know when it's helpful to step in and help them, and when to just stand back. And of course, throughout that, it's essential that they know that you are always there, that you are at the end of the phone, you'll drop everything, that you're the support. Because these days, young adulthood goes on until 29. It's now classed as. So your role is to carry on supporting in this very kind of quiet way, I suppose, unintrusive way. But your role is to still be there. But I think I think it just takes time, and as I think it takes longer for kids to kind of to grow up in the way we used to see growing up. And I think you can get very impatient when they're like 24 or 25 and they're still don't seem to be settled, or they the relationship can be tricky because you're still trying to sort of urge them to get a move on and get serious or whatever it happens to be. I think the other thing is you have to resist wanting them to be happy in the way that you would be happy. We all want our kids to be, say we want our kids to be happy, but we want them to be happy in the way we would be happy. And they're different people. And I think that's a big mistake. It's very hard. That's a tough one, but I think it's really important, and you have to take that on board, and allow them to find out for themselves. You can't tell them, and you can't tell them off anymore. You wish you
No.
could, but you can't.
Yes. I've actually had someone in one of my classes that says, I finally realized after taking this that I need to stop giving advice.
Yeah.
She gives advice to her dog children. They don't listen and she gets annoyed. And so she's
Yeah.
like, maybe I should just
Yeah.
stop giving it.
Yeah, I think
That's a possibility.
I think that's a great one. I think you only give advice when it's asked for, and even then, don't expect them to take it. I mean, it's
No.
hard, isn't it? But I really think that's important. They, as they get older, they really don't want your advice, or they'll take advice from other adults, but not so much from their parents. And again, that can be quite hurtful.
Yeah, vice versa too. I mean, our parents don't take our advice as kids,
Yeah.
especially if you like when you go to school, you're like, oh, I know all this stuff, and you need it,
Yeah.
and then they don't listen to you either. So
Yeah.
it's mutual. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that I try to do with my kids, and don't probably always do it well, is to try to get them to reflect on how things are going for them. Because I'm just thinking of our kids are probably going to get in a relationship that's not great for them. We probably did as young adults. And how can they start thinking about, like, go inward? How does this make me feel? Do I like it? Even if they go through with it, because I'm just thinking of all the situations, our teenagers, our kids, young adults, they're going to be, they're going to be around drinking, drugs, sex, rock and roll, all of the things.
Sure.
And so it's like, how do you give them the reflection that they need, that they can do on their own, to be in any situation and just know how to navigate? And I don't know if there's anything that you've done with your kids that's like, oh, this was really helpful. But that, because I'm just thinking, I'm not going to be there.
No, I think it's very hard. And I think it's something like that you just hope you've given them throughout their lives, through the way you've brought them up, through the way you've modeled behavior. I think it's very hard, especially with teenagers, to sort of get them to reflect, because they just think they know better than you do. And it's very hard for them to take advice. But I do have a kind of real belief that in their core, I certainly feel it with my own children who have not been angels, that they, in their core, they know, they have a sort of understanding of what's okay.
Right.
And but I think encouraging them to reflect, that's a very interesting idea. And I think you perhaps, again, you do that by that being part of the discourse in the family, that's the way you talk about these kind of things, you reflect on. And as parents, you reflect on things, not in a way that makes you vulnerable, but just in a way that shows you that, this is a good way to think about difficult situations.
Yeah, and I don't know if they will be able to reflect. I'm still working on my 9-year-old who's like, okay, did you do that for a reason? Like, just think about it. But it's just that bit to hopefully not tell them, because even I've got a 9-year-old teenager, like, cannot tell him what to do. Same with my 5-year-old, really. Have you ever, and do you have any advice on, do you ever share some of the things that you did as a kid? Like, I did so much stupid stuff in college, like, just to say, like, I made bad choices. Here's what I did. Have you ever, and do you recommend that?
I'm not sure. Yes, I did. I think I was perhaps a bit too honest. And
why do you say that?
Well, because I think sometimes it's better to keep some things private, and that maybe if you do it at the wrong time, I think you have to judge the time that you tell them that kind of thing. Because I think if you get your timing wrong, they can think, oh, well, mom did that or dad did that, so it's okay if I do it. Now, that's fine if they've got their reflecting skills honed. But if they haven't, then they might just think, oh, well, that's okay then. And I think, looking back, when I have certainly talked to my sons about things, I kind of wish I'd been a bit less truthful, a bit less honest. But it's, who knows? It's within individual families, isn't it? And I think if you make it very clear, if you did something bad, that you regret it, and that it was a stupid thing to do, and that can be a very useful lesson, I think.
Yeah, I like what you said about timing. Is like, are they going to be at a space in their life that they can take it and go, yeah, not a good choice, or they're saying, mom did it, I'm going to go do it too. So I think that's a really good point, what to share.
The other thing is, they might think, oh, mom did it, it's so uncool, I'll never do that, which would be quite a good result, maybe.
There you go. Sometimes you say a million things and they take this one thing you never thought they'd pick up on.
Exactly. No, exactly.
Well, so where can people find out more about you and your work?
Well, I've got a website, which is www.celiadodd.co.uk. And I'm on social media. I'm on Instagram, Celia Ruth Dodd, and I'm on Twitter at Celia_Dodd. And I'm on LinkedIn. Those are the main ways you can find out about me.
I'll link them all up in the show notes so people can get to you easily.
Great.
But before we close out today, is there anything that you want to leave the listeners with that I did not ask or we just didn't get to?
I think one thing that I really wish I'd known at the, when my children were leaving home was that it wasn't the end, that, that wasn't the end of my relationship with them. And that as I think I said before, it is just the beginning of something new. I wish I'd seen it as a continuity, as a transition, rather than a sort of, oh dear, I've a kind of wall with, I didn't know what the future could hold. I think I would have prepared much better if I'd known that. So I think the fact that it's actually a relationship that's going to last the rest of both our lives, my kids' lives and my life, is so much nicer. And that the relationship gets stronger and stronger, although you see less of each other. You're not with each other every day, but it gets stronger and stronger. I really want to give a positive message, as well as saying it's tough. I think it is tough, but like all transitions and all kind of crises, there are wonderful opportunities as well as difficult things to work through. So yeah, I'd like my overall message to be positive, I think.
Well, I think that'll give people hope. So Celia, thank you so much for your time today.
Okay, thank you so much.
I've got this different setup, so I've got to actually get the mouse to the stopper.